for Allium's brassicas. I'm Travis Cranmer, vegetable crop specialist for Allium's brassicas and leafy greens based out of Guelph with Dennis Van Dyke. Amanda Tracy and Elaine Roddy are both based out of Ridgetown, covering those crops respectively. So coming up next week, we have the cucurbit session, May 18th from 9 till 12. And if you happen to miss any part of the session today, feel free to look at the recording. So we're going to start with a little bit of background information about carrot production. So we'll have Dennis Van Dyke, vegetable crop specialist for potatoes, carrots, and other root vegetables begin.
Thank you, Travis. I don't think I need to reintroduce myself. So we'll start off with carrots. It's important when you're scouting to know sort of how the crop grows, how the crop is grown. It helps a lot in terms of growth stages for the crop. It helps just to know what you're looking for and looking at. So it's also important to know what family the crop you're scouting is in. Important to know mostly for pests and diseases. So carrots are in the Apiaceae family, right? Same family as celery, same family as dill, parsley, parsnips, a couple pretty important vegetable crops. So a lot of these crops will have similar pests and diseases on them. They'll share insect pests and some diseases in some cases. So it's good to know what family they're in terms of harvested area. Carrots, just over around 9,000 acres per year in Ontario. So a pretty significant vegetable crop. Onions as well, just under 6,000 as well. Two very important crops to Ontario, which is why we have a lot of attendance today, because it's a lot of scouting goes on in these crops as well. In terms of price per pound, onions are more valuable on a per pound basis, carrots as well. I think carrots are worth around $50 million farm gate a year. I think onions are fairly similar, around 40 or so. So two fairly significant players in the Ontario economy. Where are they grown? We have a couple different hotspots, I would say. So I'll get into it a little bit, but around half of our carrots are grown on muck soil, and around half of them are grown on mineral soil. So we have a couple muck soil spots in and around the province. There's significant production here in the Holland Marsh area, which some of you may be familiar with if you go up north to cottage country. There's also some other muck pockets in sort of down in Erie O in the Grand Bend Marsh. Also some carrot production in those regions as well. There's also some significant mineral soil production. So a lot of fresh market mineral production sort of north of the Holland Marsh in the Bradford area. And then also a lot here in Norfolk counties. And then once we get into sort of London and further, it's a lot of processing carrots grown on mineral soil. So we have a lot of, slicers, dicers for Bondwell. We have a little bit of mini carrot production in this area. So I'm not sure where you're all from or where you'll be scouting, but those are sort of the main hotspots of carrot production here. I mentioned it a bit already. Carrots and onions do well in soil that have high organic matters. This is why a lot of them are grown in rotation on those muck, high organic matter soils. You see an onion here on the muck soil. The root vegetables as well need sort of a workable, drainable soil. So sort of either on muck soils or on sort of heavy or sandier soils. They don't grow well on the heavier clay soils. A little bit on the high organic matter muck soils. They're sort of a result of drained wetland. So all that organic matter over the years accumulates, and then it's in sort of that anaerobic conditions. And so that's what sort of breaks down into that high organic matter layer that we grow in. they have to be fairly deep. A lot of the muck soils that were cleared sort of in the early 1900s, so the 20s and the 30s, have lost a lot of muck soils. So they're not always that deep. They're starting to bring up that subsoil layer, right? And they're sort of to become more marginal land. But at least in Ontario, the vast majority of the celery is grown on muck soils. You know, around 90% of the onions, about half the carrots, and a lot of the ethnic or Asian vegetables. A lot of the pak choy, the bok chow are grown on muck as well. So I mentioned already a little bit that that Holland Marsh, Bradford area. You can usually see it quite clearly when you look at GPS satellite images. Right, that black muck soil really shows up differently compared to the surrounding mineral soils. I mentioned we're losing a lot of muck soil. It's mostly due to subsidence. So as that organic matter, right, it accumulates in that anaerobic conditions. Well, once it's exposed to air, it starts to break down and basically burn off through subsidence. So it oxidizes, and so eventually all the muck soils will disappear. Over the years, we also lose a lot through wind erosion. Really a problem between Mother's Day to Father's Day. So in these next couple of weeks, it's very prone to wind erosion, right? Things start to dry out. You get a little bit of a windstorm, and that light muck soil blows. A problem if the plant is, if the crop is planted already. If it's young, it can be prone to wind damage. It can be prone to blowing and things like that and pelting. But also a problem in terms of losing that very valuable soil that you want to keep growing crops in. Some shots of that, right? The muck dust clouds. This is an older picture because it doesn't happen as much anymore. Most of the crops are now grown with some sort of nurse crop. So it could be barley, oats, whatever is the cheapest. So most growers will grow this nurse crop with the early seeded onions or carrots. That barley will germinate really quickly. It'll start to establish a little bit, and then they'll kill that with a grass herbicide. So it just really protects that young seedlings early in the growing season, so that if they do have some high winds, you don't get a windstorm and you don't get that damage you get early in the season. So let's get into carrots specifically. They are a biennial crop, so which means that they do take 2 years to complete their life cycle. We're of course not growing them for 2 years. We're just taking that seed and growing them for the storage root, and then selling that storage root. But that storage root really is supposed to grow the next year, and then it flowers for the following season. So biennial crop, all is direct seeded. Of course, there's no such thing as transplanted carrots, although there have been some transplanted carrots I've seen in not the farmers markets, but the garden centers, which is a little funny. So you want that taproot to establish. So if you have a transplanted carrot, there's no way it's going to create a marketable carrot. But all is seeded on raised beds. You will see lots of different configurations. They basically vary from grower to grower, but in general, they'll be between 28 to 36 inches across. You can see some of the raised beds here. These will just have one a single sort of triple line seeded on here. So there'll be one row of carrots, whereas you can see other raised beds. This is more popular in some of the processing fields, where you have more of a typical sort of onion raised bed, and then 2 or 3 rows of carrots growing on top of that bed. When we're looking at populations for fresh market carrots, so if you're growing for a cello or even a jumbo carrot, you're looking around 120 to 140 plants per meter, which works out to kind of 36 to 42 per foot. So important to know what crop is being grown and for what purpose, so that you can tell if there's germination issues or not early in the season when you're scouting, if that population is low or if it's high. I mentioned that the sort of 3 lines per bed. This is what it sort of looks like, right? So eventually this is going to grow up. It's going to look like one row, but really it's 3 separate lines of carrots that are coming out of the shoe of the planter or the seeder. Any idea what this is? No guesses? Barley? Yeah, this is that nurse crop. So growers will either broadcast it and then seed the plant, so it'll be all over the place, or some will have setups actually on their seeder, so they'll put nice rows alongside the actual crop. So this is the barley. Don't get confused, especially with onions, on barley versus the rest of the crop. So growth stages, important to report back if you're reporting to the grower with the growth stages, really important for herbicide applications and sometimes important for insecticide applications. So when it first comes out of the ground, right, that cotyledon stage, we call this the bunny ear stage for sort of obvious reasons. Kind of looks like a cute little bunny popping his head out. So that's the first growth stage you're going to report. And then after that is the first sort of true leaf stage. So that's going to look like a typical carrot leaf after that. So you can see a sort of one leaf coming up and then two. So then you report back on the number of leaves that are growing after this point. Once you get sort of past the sixth leaf stage, the rows on top of the rows started to fill in. And then we usually start going back to sort of canopy closure reporting. So the top of the row will close in, and then in between the rows, once before that closes, growers will sometimes like to get in some fungicide sprays, because once that canopy closes, right, there's no more sunlight penetrating through, gets really humid, perfect disease conditions. So we usually like to sort of report back, okay, you know, you're 70% closed, 80% closed, 90% closed. So the growers can sort of time getting that last fungicide application in where they can get to the base of the plant. Some more pictures of that growth stages, right? There's the bunny ears coming out of the ground. First true leaf just starting. This is sort of around probably the sixth leaf stage where that top of the hill is filling in. And then this would be a total canopy closure, 100% closed. Weed control is critical. There are some carrots down here in amongst the pigweeds. You will see lots of pigweeds out there this year. If you're scouting carrot fields, you will see lots of lamb's quarters. It's just yeah, it's common practice from what you'll see in Ontario production. Heavy pressure. Pigweeds are a huge problem because we rely heavily on group 5 and group 7 herbicides, and a lot of the pigweeds have become resistant to group 5 and group 7 herbicides. So we do typically have a high amount of pressure, and this would not be an uncommon scene. Why does it matter? Well, carrots are also terrible competitors, and they are really susceptible to weed competition. So all that pigweed competition we have here, this is all leading to yield loss every day that you have that sort of shading out effect. So this is work done by Dr. Clarence Swanton at the University of Guelph, where they kind of measured and actually quantified what the critical weed-free period of carrots, and it's about from seeding until the 12th leaf stage. The 12th leaf stage is a long time. So this is basically almost 3 months of growing where, you know, significant weed competition is going to reduce your yield. So later in the season, a lot of times, if you're, you know, into June, middle of June, getting into later, most of the time, a lot of that first flush will be gone. So then they'll disc it, and you'll have lower weed pressure. So that's, you know, up to the 4th leaf stage, but early seeded. So from a month ago until probably the next couple of weeks to the end of May, weeds are going to be a huge issue. How are they harvested? Carrots are typically pulled out of the ground by their tops. So you'll have belts side by side that will pick up the row, pinch those leaves together. Some shovels and shoes underneath will loosen the dirt, and they'll pull them out of the ground. This is especially common for fresh market and for some of the processing that's done. So this is a quick video of one of the harvesters in Ontario. So you can see those points coming through. They're picking up all the tops. They're squeezing it between belts, and they're pulling the carrots right out of the ground. There'll be knives spinning at the tops that will cut those tops right off. The carrots will fall down into a hedgehog, give it a quick clean, get a lot of the dirt off, and then they'll go up a conveyor to, well, in this case, it's a tractor trailer with crates on them. So pallet boxes will get filled. In some cases, there'll be a bulk truck going beside it. In some processing fields, you can also use just a regular potato digger. So the carrots will be topped in some way. usually a sugar beet top or something like that. And then you can just use a potato digger to just dig them out of the ground, knock the dirt off, and go into either pallet boxes or a bulk truck. So carrots are typically stored if they're going to fresh market. Processing usually goes straight to a processing plant, but in terms of fresh market, they're usually stored either in bulk, not as popular, but usually in some sort of pallet box system. We do store quite long. Most of the fresh market is sold by April, but there's a lot of growers that will store carrots basically year round. So some of those early harvested fields will be ready, end of June, going into July. Some growers can keep carrots from the previous year up until June. So just a cool little tidbit. This is how they store carrots in Europe, in the UK. They don't have harsh winters as we do, so they throw some hay on it and it keeps them from freezing, and they can store basically carrots in the ground all winter. We do have some progressive grower down in southwestern Ontario that does something similar as well. So they basically cover it, put a bunch of hay on there to keep them from freezing, and they can store these carrots in the field and then harvest them the next year. I will pass it back over to Travis.
Awesome, thank you. Right on. So we're going to start with a bit of onion production. So usually onions are grown in 4 double rows within a bed, but there are a few exceptions. So on this slide, we have 5 double rows to a bed with 4 rows of barley. The barley is what you can really see in the slide. And here we have 5 double rows that are almost pretty much evenly spaced in the bed with no barley. So transplants are used to get an earlier harvest, and around 10% of the onion production in Ontario is from transplants. As with carrots, there are some important development stages to record at the beginning of the season. The first leaf, also known as the cotyledon, coming out of the soil, when it comes out, it pushes through, and the tip is not emerging first, but kind of like the middle of that cotyledon leaf. And when it emerges through the soil, it creates this loop, or this hook. And so we call this the loop stage. Soon as that cotyledon leaf flops out and is now waving in the wind, we call that the flag stage. So still the cotyledon leaf, still that first leaf coming out of the soil. It's not a true leaf, it's cotyledon, but it's bent there and it's creating this flag. And then the next leaf that comes out of the soil line would be our first true leaf in onions. So this onion's a little bit further along. It's got at least 6 true leaves there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the hypocotyl, that loop, that flag leaf is long gone. On top of most of the acreage in Ontario is yellow cooking onions. There is a bit of Spanish production, which is basically just trying to get a larger onion and growing those onions on mineral soil. So Spanish production is generally for fresh market or onion ring production. And in general, they take longer to reach maturity. So almost all Spanish onions grown in Ontario are started in the field with a transplant. There were probably 200 or 300 acres last year started from seed, and you would have to get them in mid-April. I think they went in April 12th last year, and they basically made it to maturity by the first week of September. But most of the time, those transplants are started in the greenhouse in trays and then transplanted out into the field the first couple of weeks of May. There are a few growers that produce onion sets. Onion sets are primarily used for pickling or for residential use, kind of for backyard growers to get a head start. Maybe they're in a shady area and or there's weeds, and they're not going to have maybe the best soil or best fertilizer routine. And so this is kind of giving you an onion that's already the size of a dime, a jump start on the season so that you're able to harvest something by late August, September. So onion sets are grown basically broadcast out at 8 million seeds per acre. Normal onion field would be around 350,000 seeds to 400,000 seeds per acre or plants per acre. But with onion sets, we're at 8 million. So basically like over 100 onions per square foot. And the idea is that there's so much competition there that they create a small uniform onion the size of a dime. The goal isn't to get something larger than that because then they don't store as well and you might have bacterial rots the following year. So in late August and September, onions are pulled and left in windrows and then harvested and topped. In the past, onions were placed in pallet boxes and left in the field to dry, but most growers now prefer to take a little bit more control to curing, and they're curing onions in drying sheds. So getting into pests and diseases, why are we scouting? So our goal is to monitor pest populations to maintain plant health and produce a quality yield. So integrated pest management is an approach to pest control that considers all management options to maintain pests below an economic injury level. And this is done by correctly identifying the pest or pathogen and applying the proper management strategy. So scouting once a week is ideal, but twice a week is preferable. Keep a field map and note questionable plants each week and where you're finding them in the field. Carry around flags and plop those flags in the crop. It's amazing how hard it is to find that same group of plants the following week. You got to be thorough. So record the date, the crop stage, and any pathogens or pests that you find on each visit. So a good thing to carry around is a trowel. I'm not saying a full-on shovel is a great idea, but have a trowel there so that you can dig up and inspect those roots. There are a bunch of other things that I would suggest carrying in your truck, van, car, scouting vehicle. And I would say at some point throughout the season, all of these things are going to come in handy at some point. So here's the carrot pest activity calendar that's located at the back of your binder. If you're interested in joining us through the virtual session, email Dennis or I. And here's the pest activity calendar for onions. So this is going to give you a quick idea of what you're going to be looking for throughout different times throughout the growing season. As far as sampling goes, we like the 5x5 method. So divide large areas into sample blocks and monitor those blocks based on maturity and variety. You're going to choose 5 areas that are as different as possible throughout the field. So one of those areas might be beside a microclimate that could be that greenhouse or a hedgerow that provides some protection from wind. It might be pretty deep into the field, far away from the spray row. The field entrance is another good place to look for soil-borne pathogens because that's where they might get knocked off when equipment is entering the field. Low spots where moisture or puddles form. Low spots are a good place to look, and then high eroded knolls. There might be nutrient deficiencies there, or some pests might be targeting those plants because they're stressed for another reason. So counting insect pests of these crops allows us to determine if they are above or below a threshold and whether it is economically worth managing that pest. Some insects can be left in low numbers without compromising the overall crop quality. When there are no thresholds, the grower must make a decision as to whether to apply a pest control product. And in most cases, especially with fungi or other pathogens, no lesions are acceptable, and therefore the threshold is close to, if not zero. Always follow the re-entry interval. You are in control of your personal exposure going into a field. So communication with the farm manager, with the grower is the most important way to know what has been sprayed in the last week and if it is safe to enter. So talk to the farm manager or the grower, check that spray record, and look for signs of spraying, whether that is fresh tracks in the field, residues on the leaves, or if something smells a bit off. And do not enter the field until you know it is safe to do so. So ensure that the chemical is registered for the pest and crop. You can check the product label on the Health Canada PMRA website. Here's the label search. We also have our crop protection guide and our herbicide weed guide. If you are applying chemicals, make sure your pesticide license is up to date. And I don't have a slide, but we recently launched the Ontario Crop Protection Hub. If you were to Google Ontario Crop Protection Hub, it would come up, and basically it's a digital version of this protection guide that is searchable and filterable. And be mindful about biosecurity and how easily pathogens can spread between a field. 1 gram of soil can contain thousands, if not millions, of spores, and that gram of soil can easily stick to the bottom of your shoe, on a tire, or on equipment. So clean all dirt from equipment, keep vehicles off the field and walk into the field, and then clean your boots upon returning to the vehicle. All right, that is it for production. If you want to submit questions to the chat, we will review them over the break. But before the break, I'd like you to log back into slido.com and enter the event code. And we have some preliminary questions before we enter the entomology section. So we're trying to gauge your I guess, going into this workshop, how much you know about different pests. So we'll get the first question going. So if you go to slido.com, enter the event code CARROT, and you should come up with this first question: what is this insect? Is it aster leafhopper, carrot rustfly, carrot weevil, flea beetle, seed corn maggot, or tarnished plant bug? So we're looking at this large larva here in the middle, upper middle of the screen. Guesses are great. Just pay attention throughout the entomology section and then nail it when you come back around and we do this question again. So we have 12 people who have entered. Let's get a couple more. Go to slido.com, enter carrot, and that question should pop up on your screen. 5 more seconds. Anyone having problems in the room that I can help? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll head to the second question. What is this insect? Is it aster leafhopper, carrot rustfly, carrot weevil, an aphid, or tarnished plant bug? This event code is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get those answers in. All right, our next one. What caused this? Is it aster yellows, carrot weevil, nutrient deficiency, violet root rot, or white mold? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get those answers in. Beautiful. What is this insect? On a sticky card, Is it aster leafhopper, carrot rust fly, carrot weevil, leaf miner, or wireworm? So we are getting into potentially onion pests, insects as well. 3 more seconds. 2, 1. What caused this tunneling? Aster leafhopper, carrot rust fly, carrot weevil, flea beetle, or wireworm? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What is this insect on the sticky card? We've got 2 flies here. We're looking at the smaller fly with a red circle around it. Is it aster leafhopper, onion maggot, allium leaf miner, seed corn maggot, or onion thrips? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What is this insect? Aster leafhopper, onion maggot, allium leaf miner, seed corn maggot, or onion thrips? 4, 3, 2. Get those answers in. What caused this streaking on the onion leaf? Light colored lesions, little brown, black speckles. Is it botrytis, downy mildew, iris yellow spot virus, onion thrips, rain or hail damage, or Staphylium leaf blight? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think that's it. So we'll head for a 10-minute break. We'll meet back here at 9:45 and start the entomology section.
Unmute. So hopefully everyone can hear me again. Let's get into carrot insects. So I don't know if we've mentioned this yet already, but it's important when you're looking for insects that you are aware of what the thresholds are. So a lot of times for a lot of these pests will have economic or action thresholds developed. And what that means is there's been some studies that track the amount of pests that will cause the amount of damage. And it compares that to what the cost of usually spraying insecticide would be. So at what point do you have enough insects to cause enough damage that it'd be worth it for you to spray that expensive insecticide? That's the basic principle of what an economic or action threshold is. So if you have 3 aphids in your entire field, is it worth it to spray a $10 an acre insecticide? No, probably not. But if you have 10,000, then probably it would be. So that's the principle. So be aware what the thresholds are for the different pests that you will be scouting for. They are being updated a little bit. A lot of the thresholds were based on some older chemistries that basically just killed everything. So you wait until they get to a certain point, and then you just smacked everything back down. The newer pesticides, a lot of them will have different mode of action where you might have to apply them a little earlier so that they get inside the plant, and then or you apply them at a little bit lower level so that because they only work on a certain life stage. So again, be aware of which thresholds apply to which pest and or life stage. So it's an example of a carrot rust fly trap. In this case, 0.1 is our spray threshold. So in that first generation peak, we'd have a bunch of areas and fields that are over that spray threshold. So these fields would get a spray. But then again, for the rest of the year, there's no point in spraying in here if there's no insects around. Whereas in August, again, it spikes. So it might be worth it to spray again, as an example. So in Ontario, we have, I would say, 3 main pests of insect pests, and then a couple secondary. This is not always true. A lot of some fields, this will be the main pest. Is that a wireworm problem, depending on what the rotation is. Is it sandy ground? Some years, maybe early season cutworms will be a problem, but in general, these are the ones you'll typically see every year, and these are the ones that typically cause most of the damage. So I'm going to start with carrot weevil. In person here in the back, that dissecting scope in the back has a whole plate full of old carrot weevils from last year in it. If you want to see them in person during the break, but basically sort of a tan with dark brown to black markings on it. Weevil looking thing with a big snout, kind of cute looking, 6 millimeters long. The larvae is sort of yellowish cream, and important part here that has a sort of a brown orange head on it. That's going to distinguish it between other larval pests you're going to see in carrots. Typically only 1 generation per year. We have been getting what we think is a later second generation. Seasons might be getting a little warmer. The way that they lay eggs might be changing a little bit, where we think we might be seeing a second generation sort of in August and September. But in general, the problem is early season, mid-May to early June. These weevils overwinter, they emerge, they lay their eggs in the carrots that are young. Those eggs hatch and the larvae feed and cause a bunch of problems. So as I mentioned, these overwintering females come out, it's not their feeding that causes the problems. They don't really do any damage. It's this ugly thing that causes all the problems, this larva. So they feed a little hole, they lay a bunch of eggs in there, they seal it up, and then they hatch and they tunnel and cause problems. So this is the sort of damage that they cause. It's typically at the top third of the carrot. It's typically open winding cavities. Sometimes you can see the almost larva getting bigger as it continues to feed. So it will start smaller, and as it continues down, it'll get larger and larger and larger. But large open cavities, usually at the top third of the carrot. A little more pictures of the damage you can see, right? That open feeding cavities all over, open feeding cavities. This is actually a picture of a fairly young carrot plant, probably at the 3-leaf stage ballpark, where the weevil is actually fed a little hole in there, and that's actually a little carrot weevil egg. So obviously when this carrot weevil egg hatches, that larva is going to hammer that taproot, and it's likely going to kill the carrot. Like you can see here, this carrot on by a carrot weevil larvae, and this is it's dead. So not only do you get damage, a lot of times you can get stand losses sometimes to just the feeding. There have been models developed that can basically tell you when the feeding and the egg laying is going to happen. We use a base 7, starts accumulating April 1st. This is reported in our vegetable crop report. So if you are scouting carrot fields, it's a good idea to subscribe to our On Vegetables blog and get these vegetable crop reports. You can just, it's by county. So if you just do a quick search in the county, it'll basically tell you right away whether you expect to see carrot weevils out and active, and whether you expect to see carrot weevils out and laying eggs, which is going to cause problems. We do have another threshold where it's at a certain point, we know that most of the almost all the weevils, over 90%, have emerged, and that they've laid all their eggs and then they're done. So at that point, if you have later seeded carrots, if you're seeding carrots into June, let's say, by the time they are big enough for a weevil to find them and lay eggs in them, they will all have laid their eggs already and it's done. So it's a good idea to keep an eye out for this threshold, because once you pass that threshold, if you have later seeded fields, it's not worth the spray. There are a couple ways to scout and to bait for carrot weevils. Carrots are obviously a natural pick. We usually use the Boivin traps, which I'll show on the next slide, but this is another way. If you don't have the ability to make these traps here, you can use a carrot bait where you basically just stick old carrots in the ground and you come back and look and see if carrot weevils have fed on them and laid eggs in them. pretty straightforward. And the boy vent trap, which I'll get into a little bit on the next slide. We try and get these out as early as possible, right? Because once it warms up, like this week, it's beautiful out. Those carrot weevils are hanging out on the edge of the fields. They're in the ditch, they're in the grass next to the field. They're out and about right now, and they're looking around for the nearest carrot field. So we try and get them out as early as possible so that they attract to the bait station. We can catch them, we can track and get an estimation of how many are actually out there. This is a boy vent trap or a modified boy vent trap. We basically use a couple per field. You set them out as early as possible, as I mentioned, but it's basically just 2 pieces of wood, a bunch of slats in the wood, and then a carrot down the middle. So all it is, the carrot attracts the weevils in. They have a nice home to burrow. They like to be protected, so they hang out in the slats. They start, you can see this is actually all the little feeding pits from the females. This is what an oviposition pit would also look like. So that's what you're looking for in turn when you're looking for the carrot bait method. But when you have a boy vent trap, you basically open the top, you take a look through these slats, give it a little whack, and all the carrot weevils will just be falling out of there. So we kind of keep it close to the weedy / ditch / grass area, basically anywhere that is protected where you think that a weevil would have walked the previous year, and that will go to this year's crop. So if you're scouting a carrot field this year, you should also know where the closest carrot field that was planted last year was. A lot of times it'll be close by, so then at least you can sort of predict when they're walking from one field to the other, similar to other walking insect pests that aren't really flying around, Colorado potato beetle, for example. You should know where last year's field was so that you can trap them as they come into this year's field. So why are we even looking for them? Well, we want to do a count to see what our levels are, and if we have a certain threshold, then we would recommend spraying for them to kill them. So when you're in weevils, it's a total count. So it's a total count per trap. So you're going to count the total weevils divided by the number of traps that you have. So in this example, we have 6 traps in the field. So we find 6, we're accumulating 1. We find 12, one day in the middle of May. That means we're accumulating 2, and then this total just accumulates as you continue to find more and more each scouting day. What does this mean? Why does this matter? Well, our spray thresholds are 1.5 weevils per trap at the second leaf stage of carrots, right? Again, leaf stage coming back to be important, and 5 cumulative weevils per trap at the 4th leaf stage. So in this example, right, between May 8th and May 12th, we've now reached our first spray threshold. So you need to know what the carrot stage is at, and if the carrot stage is, at the 2-leaf stage at this point already. So let's say it was planted early in April and it's already at the 2-leaf stage. Well, then you'd recommend a spray. If the carrots were seeded at the beginning of May and they're not up yet, well, then, if maybe it's not worth it to spray at this point. And then again, that second spray threshold is at the 5th stage. So in this example, it's pretty high pressure. Within basically a week or 2, we've reached our double spray threshold already. If you're using bait carrots and you don't have the boy vent traps, basically if a quarter of your carrots show any sort of feeding damage on it, right? Those little feeding holes, the little craters, any sign of eggs being deposited, that would be a trigger to spray. Any questions on weevils? If you are on muck soil, you will definitely find weevils. If you are in mineral soil, there's a lesser chance that you will encounter a lot of weevil pressure this year. It's a little bit regional, but yeah.
Would all those sprays be systemic then?
So this is one of those ones that's been tweaked a little bit. So the question was on virtual, would the sprays be systemic? This spray threshold is developed with Imidan, so no, group 1B, just that hammer. We have tweaked it a little bit with some of the newer products that we're using, but the principles are the same, to be honest. We're still targeting 2 to 4 leaf stages for our first and second application. Sometimes it's the 6th, but the timing stages are working out basically the same. So we're using the same spray thresholds. So as we start to use systemics, yes, but this threshold was already a little early. Like we really don't see a lot of feeding damage until you're after the 4th leaf stage anyway. So it's a bit conservative to start. So it works well with the systemics to get a little bit better coverage and time for it to really get in the plant. So it's worked out similar. Okay, on to our second major important pest, carrot rust fly. Carrot rust fly has a bit of a wider host range than weevils, at least. They're feeding on wild and cultivated carrot, celery, and parsley for the most part. Does overwinter in Ontario as little pupae, and we typically have 2 generations if it's really hot. We sometimes get a 3rd late September, early October. So first generation we usually see in early June, so still a couple weeks away, usually timed with lilac bloom. Second generation we usually see mid-August. This is the generation that really causes a lot of our problems and our damage. And late September can sometimes catch us off guard if we get enough degree days for that to happen. So what happens, those female flies lay their eggs in the soil near the carrot plants. Similar idea, those eggs, of course, hatch, and the larvae will start to feed on the finer roots and then eventually on the main roots. So this will also cause tunneling. It'll also cause twisting. The damage is a little different than carrot weevil. Carrot weevil has larger open cavities, usually in the top third of the carrot. Carrot rust fly, for whatever reason, seems to drop lower on the carrot, and you usually see it in the bottom 2/3 of the carrot. More twisting, more underneath the carrot skin, feeding damage. You can see here, this is, oh, you can't see very well in person, but this is feeding underneath the skin, but you can kind of see it and it sort of pops its head up, in and out. It's a little different than the carrot weevil, smaller tunnels, and usually just under the carrot skin. The adults, you're looking for a shiny black little fly with an orange head and yellow legs, kind of a 1/2 centimeter in length, long 3rd antennal segment, not really relevant unless you have a dissecting scope. The larvae are 6 to 7 millimeters, yellowish and white. So I mentioned for the carrot weevil larvae, it's important to know that they have a distinct brown orange head on them. That's because rust fly larvae do not. So they are more of a fly larvae, right? Beetle larvae will have a head, fly larvae do not. Same in this case, it'll have a little black mark where it's a feeding tooth and a little blunt end on the one end, but it will not have a distinct head. This is what they will look like the majority of the time on a sticky trap. We use orange or yellow-orange sticky traps to trap for them. You can see here, shiny black body, 3 parts, sort of an orange head, yellow legs, right? Black body, shiny, orange head, yellow legs dangling. So these are all rust fly. This is typically what you're going to see and what you're going to look for on a sticky card. Like weevils, we also have a degree day model developed for emergence, also reported in our vegetable crop report. So we typically see first generation adults at this degree day. We'll let you know that when you expect to see the first, typically early June, so a couple weeks yet, and same with second generation. So just a little reminder to be on the lookout and to expect to see higher numbers. We use yellow-orange traps, typically covered with tanglefoot. We usually do 5 per field around the edges and just above the carrot canopy. Why do we do that? Well, carrot rust fly are terrible flyers. So they don't actually live in a carrot field at all. They live in bushes next to the field or forested areas or even the grass. They live in areas outside the field, and they typically just fly into the field to feed a little bit and to lay their eggs. They're also terrible flyers, so they don't really fly in. They're sort of just hovering around and kind of going over. So we like to keep the trap just above the canopy so that when they're sort of just hopping around the canopy, you collect the most rust fly possible. This is a picture of the sticky traps we're using, and also next to a boy vent trap. So carrot weevil and carrot rust fly traps, usually around the same area, just on the edge of the field, typically next to any grassy area or bush area that's around the field. we recommend checking twice per week. I know that doesn't usually happen sometimes. Usually it's once a week at best, but the more often is better because carrot rust fly has a very small spray threshold. So this is a little different than carrot weevil, right? Carrot weevil is a cumulative. So if you keep catching more and more, then you trigger it. This is more of an active threshold, which means that it changes by the day. So you count the amount of flies you catch, you divide that by the amount of traps you have, typically 5, and you divide that by the amount of days before you last checked it. So, you know, if you only have a couple flies, you divide that by 5, you divide it by, you know, 3 days if you're doing twice a week, or 7 days if you're doing once a week. That's not a lot of flies to trigger a 0.1 spray threshold. There have been 2 thresholds. We've started to just recommend the 0.1 flies per trap per day threshold. Seems to be more sensitive, harder to trigger this threshold anymore, and we still sort of see damage at the 0.1. So 0.1 low threshold. Yeah, any questions on rust fly? Rust fly is more ubiquitous. It can be basically anywhere in the province. So it's less soil type or regional specific than carrot weevil is. We typically see it kind of across the province each year. Okay, on to our third one. Aster leafhopper. So aster leafhopper here on the top right. It's not actually the aster leafhopper that's a problem. The problem is that this aster leafhopper transmits a phytoplasm. So think of it as a vector. It's basically, it's not a virus, but a virus-like organism. So this leafhopper goes around, feeds, and spreads virus all over your crop. So the adult's kind of greenish gray, 3 mils in length. What's distinct about this one is it has 6 spots on its head. So you can kind of see this when you're on a sticky trap. That distinguishes it. One of the distinguishing features between that and a potato leafhopper. The other distinguishing is this: the color is a little different. With a potato leafhopper, it's more of a lime green and they are smaller. The aster leafhopper is a little larger. It's more of a bluey dull green, and then the back is usually a bit darker if you see the wings come up. So it can sometimes be hard to tell the difference, but those are some distinct things to look for. Nymphs, you hardly ever see them. They're a little bit harder to ID, but this is what they look like. They're quite fast. We have 2 problems with aster leafhopper. We have a local population, and we also have ones that blow up from the south. So our local population are eggs laid on grain. So if you have any winter wheat or fall rye, there'll be a bunch of aster leafhoppers hanging out in them. They'll feed on those grains a little bit, but once they start to mature and die back, and they're being cut, they'll flush out of those and they'll move to whatever is closest. So sometimes that's vegetables. So what we usually see is, especially when they start to hay, or especially when the wheat starts to mature, you will see a flush of aster leafhoppers into the field from week to week. So be mindful of that. Keep an eye out on what's going on in the area, because that's important. Usually early June, but again, depends on the season and how the grains are maturing. Wide range of cultivated and weed hosts, so it can basically feed on anything. A couple generations each year. This is sort of that mid-June peak you usually see, right? So this is probably, the grains are maturing, everybody's starting to cut the first cut of hay. So they're getting pushed out of those fields and they're getting pushed into the vegetable field. And this is either the second generation or another generation, or maybe a storm came and blew up some populations from the south. We use the same traps as we do for rust flies. So those orange, yellow, sticky traps, perfect for leafhoppers. They do catch a good amount, and they give you a good sort of baseline of what's out there. We can also use sweep nets, fairly easy. Just have a net. Best when it's not too windy and the insects aren't getting blown around, but basically you do a couple sweeps, walk in a straight line, and just check if you can find any of these adults in there. This is what they'll look like on a sticky card. Maybe a little tough to see. I'd love to still have one. I could throw it under the microscope, but we don't have any from last year yet. But these are the aster leafhoppers. So you can see it's kind of a bluey green. You can see in this case some of the spots on its head. Aster leafhopper, aster leafhopper, aster leafhopper. What's the tricky part? This potato leafhopper. So you can see how it's really easy to mix up the two. This is a little bit smaller, maybe you can't tell here, but a little bit smaller, a little bit narrower, a lime green. This is a little bit duller green, and you can see on its back, it's dark underneath where the wings are. So that's an important part, distinguishing features between the two. The spots on the head, duller, a little bit smaller, and really bright lime green. So what's the main problem? Well, the main problem is that phytoplasm I mentioned, right? They're spreading that phytoplasm around. They're causing this aster yellow symptoms in the crop. So what you basically see and what it causes is just a bunch of random growth. So you'll see the crown of the carrot will start just making a whole bunch of pale leaves. If you pull the carrot up, you'll see the roots are just making a whole bunch of crazy roots. And that's caused by that phytoplasm. So that's the real issue with this insect. Often what you can see is that red leaf walking through a field. So it can be sometimes easy to identify them walking through the field. Red leaf, go check, go look at the base and the crown of the carrot, and you'll see this proliferation of leaves. Pull it up, you'll see the proliferation of roots. The issue is once you're seeing those red leaves in the field, the phytoplasm's already been around for a couple weeks, right? So the feeding's already occurred and it's already infected likely other plants in the area. They just haven't showing symptoms yet. So that's why that trapping is really important. So you know when that flush of leafhoppers are coming into the field, you can catch them before you're seeing these symptoms. And because after this happens, it's much too late. 4-day incubation period. I mentioned it takes 7 to 14, a couple of weeks to sometimes show symptoms. So that's why the early detection is key. The good thing is that this is not passed from the adults to the offspring. What this means is that overwintering generation does not have the phytoplasm in them. So those eggs that are laid in the winter wheat or the fall rye does not have that phytoplasm in them. It's those leafhoppers that are flushing up from the south and the States that have the phytoplasm, and then they infect plants, and then the local population feeds on the same plants, and then it spreads around. So this is a tricky one because some years will have very high levels and other years will have very low levels. Depends on weather patterns, depends on the storms that are coming up from the southern US, and it depends on what their percentage of infectivity is. So last year, for example, huge aster leafhopper year. The last time we had a huge aster leafhopper year that was as bad was 2014. So very sporadic, but it's why we need to be diligent in looking for those aster leafhoppers before you see the symptoms, because once you see the symptoms, it'll start to pop up in the next weeks as you continue to scout. So a little more pictures of what you're looking for in the field, right? Sometimes it's the yellowing, turns the red leaves, and then that's where you'd zero in and look more for those other symptoms. Okay, any questions on aster leafhoppers? You'll probably run across them in other crops as well because they do cause problems in a number of vegetable crops. Wireworms, very general feeders. They cause a lot of problems in vegetables and other field crops. They are actually the larvae of click beetles, so little black beetles. We have a number of species in Ontario. This is typically found in the sandier soils, typically found in southwestern Ontario. It's really a problem after grass crops. So if you have a lot of grains in the rotation, if you have a lot of corn in the rotation, typically you have higher wireworm numbers. Their eggs are typically laid around those grasses and the grains. And then these larvae will then go into the soil. Can take anywhere up to 6 years, typically 3 to 4, but 3 to 6 years, these larvae are in the soil. So any crop that's susceptible to wireworm damage within that time is going to be susceptible. So carrots are one, very susceptible, right? You're growing that carrot for the carrot. So any blemish on that carrot is an issue. These cause huge problems in fields with high populations. You can bait for them. If anyone is involved in any field crop and neonic evaluations, you may be familiar with that. They are attracted to carbon dioxide in the soil. So if you take a bag of, I've seen carrots, corn, any sort of flour of some kind, make it wet. That'll start to give off CO2. You just bury it in the ground a little bit and flag it. You come back a couple of days later, and if you have any worms in the field, you will find them in that bait trap. So a good way, if the grower is going into a new field, doesn't know the wireworm pressure and wants to know, this is a good way to do that. Millipedes, very sporadic as well, very dependent on the field, but just be aware of them. They coil up when disturbed. Generally, they are beneficial. They do feed on a lot of the carrot insects, but if you have high populations, then they will start to feed on the actual carrots. A couple species in Ontario as well, but generally, if you're finding feeding damage and holes and tunnels in the carrots, that's not at the top third and superficial like carrot weevil, that's not in the bottom 2/3 and small tunnels like carrot rustfly, then it's typically wireworm damage. So this is what the millipedes look like, right? Sort of a big open feeding, different than the carrot weevil, right? It's smaller tunnels than the carrot weevil do. This is sort of just a big open feeding pit that you'd see with millipedes. Again, monitoring for them, you'd monitor it sort of the same way. I've already mentioned those bait traps here, right? Just a bag of corn or carrots or whatever, something that's going to break down and give off CO2. You can also use pitfall traps, a little bit more time consuming. This is typically only used in research, but you can use that as well. If you're going out to a carrot field, what's your setup looking like? So in this case, our blue traps are our weevil traps, and our yellow traps are our sticky cars. So we would look at the field. We would, of course, talk to the grower and know that, okay, this is onions this year. Well, that's because it was carrots last year. So we want to monitor all this carrot weevil that's in this carrot field from last year. It's going to walk into this year's carrot trap. So we're going to put our weevil traps in between. We're also going to put them here where we may think that the carrot weevils are going to hang out in that grass, right? Similar with the carrot rust fly, next to an area where we think that they are hiding out. So somewhere with grass, somewhere with trees, somewhere with bushes, and then along the side of the field as well. So that's what the setup that you're going for in a carrot field. When you're scouting, in this case, this is later on in the season, the canopy is closed, right? You don't want to be tromping through the carrot canopy. Not only does it stay wet and you'll get soaked, but you also just do a bunch of damage for no reason. So we typically recommend to stay in the sprayer tracks for the most part. Stop in, do your spot counts, right? Your 5x5 counts, get into the canopy, look down at the base of the plant, see if there's any rot of any kind, which we'll get into in the pathology section, and then go back to the spray rows and then make their way through there. So it's much easier to do much damage and you're much more efficient that way. With that, wraps up carrot insects. I'll pass it back over to Travis.
Thank you. All right, let's get started on onions. So our number one onion pest is onion maggot, and it is a Delia maggot fly. So onion maggot can also be confused with seed corn maggot. And if you're next to a brassica field, it could also be confused with cabbage maggot. Really, to tell the difference between cabbage maggot and onion maggot, you're counting the number of hairs on those legs. So it can be really difficult to tell the difference between these two. Dennis, would you like to put the onion maggot example around, pass that around there? These flies overwinter in the top 15 centimeters of soil, and they can lay up to 200 eggs around the base of the plant. They hatch 10 days after emergence, and basically these little larvae are tunneling, burrowing into the plant. So they start as a pupa. That pupa emerges as an adult fly. That adult fly lays eggs, and those eggs hatch out into larvae that eat the plant. So small plants are pretty susceptible, and one onion maggot could kill up to 20 plants early in the season if the plants are small. Its second generation targets the plant before bulbing and can cause stunting or can distort the bulb. And the third generation creates wounds that compromise the storage quality of that onion going into storage before harvest. So we have degree day models that use a base of 4 that can predict when the flies are most likely to emerge. The first generation is around 210 growing degree days, and the second is around 1025. And we do not normally reach the third generation for onion maggot in a lot of growing regions. So onion maggots are monitored using these yellow or blue sticky cards. The key is that you have 3 together and you're taking the average number of all 3, and that is 1 trap. So a trap is a set of 3 cards. And you're basically placing these around the outside edges of that field and counting them on a weekly or twice a week basis. So here's an example from 2020, from May 12th in 2020. And basically none of those regions in this example had reached that threshold, but Essex was getting quite close. So maybe next week we'd reach that 210 degree day threshold, and then you'd expect to see the peak of or start catching onion maggots in the field. So sticky card monitoring is a great way of monitoring the actual fly pressure in the field. And like I said, 3 cards make up a trap. Onion maggot fly is generally has a gray body with red eyes and is about half the size of a housefly. Seed cord maggot fly, on the other hand, it's at the top. It's about half the size of an onion maggot fly. So we've got onion maggot fly on the bottom of the sticky card with seed cord maggot fly on the top. So if we're using card counts for onion maggots in the field, if there are just onion maggots present and no seed cord maggot flies, there will likely be 2 main peaks in the field that will be observed throughout the growing season. And if there is more noise or multiple peaks, it's likely that there is seed cord maggot there as well. You can also monitor onion maggot using destructive sampling. So you would dig up 50 plants at 4 or 5 sites in the field and look for damaged roots, look for plants that are wilted, see if you can find any maggots in those damaged plots. So the first generation, as I mentioned previously, it causes the most generation. Up to 20 plants could get killed by 1 maggot. Second generation, you get those misshapen bulbs, and third generation causes rots in storage. So here are some examples of that first generation damage in the field. We've got onion at 2-leaf stage, and you can see this guy wilted and went down quite quick. So one day, these larvae could be feeding, the plant wilts. Second day, that it's 25, 30 degrees. It's pretty hot, it's pretty dry. That plant can shrivel up quite quick, might turn yellow or white. Third day, it might be dust. They go down quick, and that's why it's really important to look for wilted plants and go out to the field often. Here's that second generation damage. Walk up to a plant at the 4th or 5th leaf stage, you see those wilted leaves, you pull it out with your trowel. You don't need a big shovel, just a trowel, and collect, look for those larvae. And you can throw them in a Ziploc bag and let them complete their life cycle, and you see adult maggot flies. At third generation, it's going to cause problems in storage and introduce pathogens to those bulbs in storage. So besides sticky cards and destructive sampling, it is also a great idea to use damage plots. So in 4 areas of the field, and this could be close to your sticky card counts, you're going to put in a stake and count out 25 plants and put in another stake. And if you're in a normal cooking onion field where you've got 4 rows, you could do that in all 4 rows, giving you 100 plants to count. Every week you go back to that field, you're going to count how many plants remain. And it is surprising how quickly plants disappear throughout the season. And this will give you information on whether future field densities should be increased or decreased, maybe because of the onion maggot pressure. Might be a good indication to irrigate more if you've got a lot of plants going down in a dry part of the season. Yeah, you're just determining the percent damage. As far as treatment thresholds go, foliar insecticides for onion maggots are not a good control measure, but it is good to know what the pressure is like in the field. So let's say that you went out into the field on June 7th. You've got an 8-acre field and you've got 4 sets of traps set up on each side of the field with our 4 damage plots. In those 4 damage plots, we have 400 plants. And in the damage assessment plots, you find that 30 plants are lost or damaged. So 30 plants out of those 400 multiplied by 100 gives us 7.5% damage. This was last scouted 3 days ago. And therefore we have 30 flies divided by the number of traps divided by 3 days since we were last there. It gives us 2.5 flies per trap per day. So our thresholds, basically we would treat if we were above 2%. Adult sprays are not typically recommended. And in our example, in the damage plots, we'd have 7.5% damage or 2.5 flies per trap per day. As far as other management strategies go for onion maggot, we're currently trialing releasing sterile flies in the field and seeing how that could work as an alternative for insecticide applications. So right now, onion maggot suppression is generally relying on a suppresso seed treatment or on group 1 organophosphates, specifically chlorpyrifos. And since the chlorpyrifos is being phased out and suppresso neonics, the future might be uncertain. We're looking at alternative ways of battling this pest, and one of them is through releasing sterile flies in the field. So the idea is that these flies are raised in a lab. They produce eggs, and those eggs hatch out into larvae, and then those larvae create pupae, and these pupae are frozen in such a way that it preserves them without killing them. The lab then ships the pupae in a container to the field site. The grower can take those pupae, dump them into an emergence box with some food and some water. And over the next 2 to 3 days, those pupae will hatch out and you'll have an emergence box with 10,000 flies. So these flies are dyed pink. They'll have this pink tinge to them, and you'll be able to see on the sticky cards whether it's a pink lab-grown sterile fly or if it's a wild fertile fly that's native in the field. So basically, over time, the idea is that these sterile males mate with the wild fertile females in the field. Those females lay eggs that don't hatch out, and over time, the population collapses. And so we're trialing this in onion sets and as well as cooking onions in 2 locations. And both growers have stopped spraying or using any sort of insecticides for onion maggot. At the onion set field, you've got 8 million seeds, plants per acre. And to think that you're not applying an insecticide is pretty impressive with the density that high and growing onions in the same general region year after year. Our next insect pest is onion thrips. So these onion thrips, they overwinter in alfalfa, clover, hay, winter wheat, and as those crops are harvested or cut, they are moving into our onion fields. Adults are quite small, straw brown, tan in color, and basically they're causing that streaking that we saw in that introductory quiz. They're feeding on the onion leaves and they're lowering the photosynthetic rate of that plant. It results in a yield drag and makes the plant more susceptible to diseases. So in heavy infestations, you will get this streaking on it. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up those leaves, pull them apart and look in the leaf axils for nymphs and adult thrips, and you're going to be counting the number of thrips that you find. Here are some photos of that streaking and that damage that those thrips can cause. So when we monitor for the thrips, it's important to really open up that plant and look down in there. They like to burrow themselves deep within that plant. Take note as to when other crops are drying down in adjacent fields. And when you have transplanted onions or onions with a very early seeding date planted next to a later seeding date, as those onions start to senesce and lodge, they're going to move, those thrips are going to move into that younger planting of onions. So you're going to count the number of thrips in the plants out of 100 plants on the inner leaves. So maybe 20 plants at each of your 5 sites. You go to the first site, count out 20 plants, count how many thrips you're finding there. And let's say, in this example, let's say that you find 650 thrips amongst those 100 plants, and the plants are at the 6th leaf stage. We would take 650 divided by 100 plants at the 6th leaf stage, and that gives us 1.1 thrips per leaf. Our threshold is currently set to 3 thrips per leaf. So if you're able to stay under that 3 thrips per leaf, you're going to avoid that economic injury. That's our threshold. Our next insect is cutworms. There are many different species of cutworms in Ontario. Black and dark-sided cutworms are the most common. And basically these cutworms are from moths that are blowing in from the south, laying their eggs in the crop, and as those eggs hatch out, they're feeding on those onions. These guys cause damage that looks like someone went through the crop with scissors and just cut the plant at the base. So it's common to find them along field borders or hedgerows, and they will often attack several plants in a row. So it'll look like someone came along with scissors and cut 5 plants in a row. They're pretty sporadic, and there are no well-defined thresholds. I included a couple slides of leek moth. Leek moth is not generally a pest of onions based on how many insecticide applications are applied for thrips, but can be an issue in fields that you're not applying insecticides as often. It's basically throughout southwestern Ontario, and this moth is able to overwinter here. Overwinters as an adult moth, lays its eggs around this time of year, last week of May, early June. And as those eggs hatch out, the larvae are going to tunnel mine inside the onion leaf. So here's that larva actually feeding on a garlic leaf. And here's what the adult moth looks like alive. You're not going to see it throughout the day. It's nocturnal. Moths are nocturnal. This is going to come out at night. So here is some leek moth damage that you could expect on onion and leek Here's that window painting that you're likely to see on an onion. So it's going to eat from the inside out, and that makes insecticides really hard to make contact with this larva. So if leaf moth does become an issue, you can use a pheromone trap to count the number of moths per trap per week. And on a sticky card, this is what a leaf moth can be expected to look like. So that's the head of a clothespin, paperclip rather, and it's pretty tiny. Our next pest is leaf miners. They're not too common, and they kind of cause a similar sort of damage as leaf moth. So these guys are really small. It's a fly, and they're laying their eggs on the leaves, and they're feeding between the leaf surfaces of that onion. So as you scout, you would note the problem areas in the field on your field map and look for those adult flies on your yellow sticky cards. There are no thresholds currently established for leaf miners. The next pest is currently not in Ontario, but you should be on the lookout for it. It's Allium leaf miner. And this is basically a specific type of leaf miner. And like the leaf miners I mentioned before, they mine the leaves. And when you open the plant, you might find a pupae similar to that of onion maggot, but instead of being in the soil near the base of the plant, this pupae is going to be inside the stalk of the onion, garlic, or leek. So you're going to find these little white marks on the onion stem. That's the feeding damage there. And currently it's in most counties in Pennsylvania. Like it's pretty close. It's only a matter of time before we'll probably see it in southwestern Ontario. So floating row covers for leaf moth would also be good for allium leaf miner, but they're not practical in onion production. So if you find this, let me know. The last pest I want to include is the wireworm, or the adult known as click beetle. Dennis covered it before. It likes high organic muck soils and causes sporadic damage in onions. So if you'd like to monitor for wireworm pressure, maybe the field has carrots in it going into it the following year, you could set up a bait station as Dennis covered earlier. So here is our typical onion field setup. We have 4 sets of those yellow sticky cards on the perimeter of the field on the 4 sides. And we have our damage plots where we're counting out 100 plants every week and seeing what percentage of plants remain every week. And then you're going to choose 5 spots on top of this, you know, maybe one in here close to this residence, one over here by this residence, and 3 other spots, and you're going to count in those 5 spots for a number of thrips. Great. On any questions about onion insects before we move on to physiological disorders?
Okay. Thank you, Travis. I'm going to go through physiological disorders now. But what I want you to do is, physiological disorders are important to know, but it's more important to be familiar with your insects and diseases. Those are the ones that growers can do something about immediately. It's usually something that is more actionable. In general, physiological disorders are longer term issues, weather issues, and things like that, which the grower has less control over. So it's important that the slides I go through now, you rule out the insects and diseases. And then if you still don't have an answer on what is causing the issue, then you can look at physiological problems. Yeah. So when you're looking at physiological disorders, look for patterns. is the whole plant affected? If the hailstorm went through, only one side of all the onion leaves will be pelted with rain, or will have bruising on them, right? Look for the patterns in the field. That's the only way you'll be able to see some of these issues. Is it a low-lying spot? Are you only seeing the problems on the high spot in the field? Are you only seeing the problems near the road or a house or a ditch or things like that? Those are important things to look for, which is why it's important, right? When you first step out of your car to scout a field, quick survey, see anything out of the ordinary that you can target, then you target those areas, and if not, then you start your scouting. So some examples of physiological problems, a lot of them are weather related. So, early season frost, heat, drought, waterlogging, hail, lightning, all of those things can cause issues, and that you may see nutrient deficiencies as well. Again, I mentioned there's some of those long-term things that may not have quick fixes, but are important to monitor and to know. Coming back to patterns, right? What are the patterns in the field? Is it the whole field? Is it just a strip? Maybe it's one bed up the middle in between two spray tracks, right? Where there was some overlap in the sprayer and there's some herbicide damage. Again, important to diagnose and to look at. Is it natural? This is why knowing the growth stages are important, as I mentioned earlier, right? It's natural for some of the older leaves to die off in onions, for example, or celery, or in transplanted crops, a little bit of transplant stress, right? After transplanting, they establish, but then the old leaves die. Well, that's not necessarily a disease or a problem. It's natural and it's okay, but you need to know that so you're not raising red flags when there are none. Soil compaction, drought mentioned, and again, coming back to this, rule out disease and insect first, every time. So let's go through a couple of them. Early season frost damage. I'm hoping we don't see this anymore, but we may still see some results of it because of the cold temperatures we've had all spring. It's been a fairly cold spring. It's been a slow spring. Hasn't been an overly wet spring, just sort of cold and no sunlight. So early planted crops, you may see some issues with frost. They may still be showing symptoms on the older leaves, yellowing, a little bit of burning, all possible with frost. Very variable depending on the crop, right? Especially later in the season. This is the same frost. Peas are fine. Artichokes are just okay. Pumpkins got hammered, right? So know whether your crop is frost tolerant or not. I've already kind of mentioned this. Transplant stress, very common with transplanted crops. The older leaves are going to die off, totally normal. Just check and make sure that the growing point is still active and that there's new roots establishing. Lightning strikes. Again, one of the your biggest risks when you're out there scouting is lightnings, believe it or not. This is a carrot field. The scout that was monitoring this field, freak thunderstorm came up. He had just gone back to his car when the lightning hit the field he was just in. So we went back to the spot, and this is a lightning strike. If you didn't know that lightning was there, it'd be pretty hard to tell, but there was actually an old flag that was sticking out here. So it was attracted to the old flag. These are all kind of cooked, boiled, disgusting carrots, yellowed off. There's no other sort of explanation for them. Seen a similar thing in onions, right? A circle that doesn't really make much sense in terms of diseases. So keep that in mind. If you don't have an explanation, maybe it was lightning, but the bigger story is if there's a thunderstorm coming in, get out. Hail. This is an onion field that was shredded by hail. This is actually pretty early on, so this field might have survived. Later in the season, hailstorms are devastating for crops. So this is what hail looks like. Pelting rain can also be an issue. So not necessarily hail causing damage, but even just a really hard rainstorm can cause problems. This is a carrot field that had pelting rain, so a couple inches of rain in a couple of minutes. But this stage of carrot growth, the taproot is still establishing. So the stress that was caused by this pelting rain, them getting whacked over, them having to stop their growth, actually terminated the taproot. So this was basically a whole field of forked, stunted, short carrots. So they had to disc this field. So be mindful of the weather, and especially of any storms. Drainage is important. Not only does it leach nitrogen, but anaerobic conditions, and it'll kill plants if it stays there for too long. So again, one of the reasons we grow in raised beds, especially for some of the root vegetables. Transplant differences, right? You can see that in the field. A lot of issues in the greenhouse can make its way out to the field. Wind damage. This is why we grow nurse crops. This is a no nurse crop field that you can see. Not only is the seed blown out, but see the curling over of the leaves. That's caused by the wind damage. So basically caused pigtailing, and it just wrecks the one side of the leaf, so it grows over itself. Heat canker, too much heat, especially a problem in sandy soils and especially a problem in muck soils. So basically the soil gets so hot that it burns the plant near the soil level, and that causes, right, scarring, it causes a buildup, and that restricts growth. So basically these carrots have been so hot that they've got basically scarring there, and they won't grow any larger than that because of that scarring. So they'll end up looking funny and they won't actually grow into a carrot. Not only do you see this, a lot of times you'll see damping off associated with this as well. So some carrots will be dead and other carrots will survive, but still won't make it all the way to harvest. If you're scouting carrot fields, you will see lots of forking when you pull up carrots. And the list is very long, what causes carrot forking. It's a very frustrating issue because with carrots, there's a lot of things that can cause carrot forking. Again, I want you to focus on the diseases and the insects that can cause that first. Once you have those narrowed or ruled out, then you can go and look at other issues. So Pythium disease, we'll talk about in the pathology section. Nematodes, same issue, causes a lot of forking. If you've done soil tests and you can determine it's not that, well, compaction, too much water, not enough water, pounding rain, heat stress, wind damage, herbicide injury, all of those can cause these ugly looking carrots. Bolting is when the crop goes to seed. So I mentioned with carrots, it's biennial crop, same with onions. When they go to seed the first year, it's usually as a result of stress, usually a result of cold temperatures generally. So carrots, right, looks like Queen Anne's lace when it bolts, caused by generally cold temperatures early in the season. Mammal feeding, very common. Chimera, something you'll definitely see out there. Chimera, it looks cool. It's basically just a genetic mutation. Basically, it just causes variegated looking crops. Not really a problem, not really an issue. Looks cool, doesn't really affect overall yield. So just make a note of it and know that this is Chimera. Dodder is a parasitic plant. Actually, it's all this yellow stuff is dodder. I've seen it a couple of times over the years. Kind of cool, to be honest. It's actually a parasitic plant. So what it does is just, it's like a vine. It just grows, attaches itself to the plant and just sucks the nutrients out. So if you do see a cool, big, yellow, viney spot, try not to spread it anywhere else. Mineral deficiencies. So I think if you're work for a fertilizer company, this is generally more important, but diagnosing mineral deficiencies usually done by a soil test, but a lot more tissue tests going on now, and a lot more foliar feeding. So more foliar applications, especially for micronutrients, to top up the plant to what looks deficient. Macro versus micro. A couple really important ones in here, right? Manganese, molybdenum, which I'll get into in a sec. So quickly, carrot nitrogen. I'll not go over this in too much detail, but these are our general OMAFRA recommendations for nitrogen rates. This is what nitrogen deficiency looks at. It's a nitrogen trial. You can see, you know, if you had a whole field of this, it may not look too different. Right? If the whole field was like this, you may just think that it was a little bit behind the rest of the fields. What it's really supposed to look like is this. So that's why soil testing and sometimes tissue testing is important to tell whether or not this is deficient, and it really should be like that. Same thing, I'll keep this in your binders for future reference. These are our phosphorus recommendations for carrots. I won't get too much into what the nutrients do. What's important about carrots and potassium is that potassium deficiency can sometimes show up as reddish discoloration. Again, often confused with ashy yellows, right? Same issue. Really easy to tell the difference. If you see red leaves, just go and look at the base of the plant. And what are you looking for at the base of the plant? Lots of growth. So if you see lots of growth, that's ashy yellows. If you don't see any growth, you pull it up, there's nothing wrong with the carrot. Well, you may have a potassium issue. Magnesium deficiency shows up as sort of interveinal yellowing, right? So the veins will be green, but the rest of it will be yellow. So keep that in mind, right? Green veins, yellow leaves could be a symptom of magnesium deficiency. Calcium is a large molecule, has to move with water. So if you have a hot and dry conditions, water is not moving very well, which means calcium is not moving very well, which means in your new growth, a lot of times you can have deficiency of calcium. So tip burn is a very common problem with a bunch of crops, lettuce, celery, other brassica crops, potatoes is an issue as well. So in general, hot and dry, you start to see calcium issues show up. Magnesium is important for onions. You can typically see similar to magnesium, greener veins and yellowing around that. Example of lightning strike in onions, right? Big circle melted away, no other explanation, no disease or downy mildew there. Getting into onions, this is a more pelting rain injury, right? So easy to confuse this with a disease, maybe botrytis, maybe something else. That's why it's important to know what went through the field and to look for symptoms. So generally when you have a pelting rain, usually it's coming from one direction. And usually what you'll see in the field is that one side of the leaf will be totally marked up, the other side will be completely fine, and that symptom will be throughout most of the field. Early in the season, when you got wind blasting, this is the issues that you're going to see, right? Again, why we need to nurse crops to sort of block this. But this is an onion that has basically been completely stripped by sandblasting. So light soils happen on sandy and on muck soils early in the season, strips the wax away, and these onions will basically be dead. The pigtails in onions will be common, caused by wind damage, stripping the side away, right? And they grow over each other, cause a pigtail. Also caused by herbicide damage. So gold damage you will see out there, and it will be caused of similar issues. Salt damage near the edge of the roads, very common problem. Poor soil in general, again, generally near the edge of the road. I mentioned herbicide injury already, right? This is gold damage. So yellow spots all along the side of the carrot will cause pigtailing a lot of times, and no halos on there, which will make more sense when Travis talks about pathology. This is an example of a reason that you need to know about the physiological growth of crops. Tip burn is a natural growth stage of onions. When the onions start to bulb up, it's very stressful. Basically, the onion grows its leaves early in the season, and then at a certain point, it switches that. And now it's all about the bulb. So, and then everything moves down. All the sugars move down into the bulb. Very stressful on the plant, and naturally, the tips will go yellow as all those nutrients move into building the bulb. So this is not a problem unless you start to get disease in there. So just be mindful that basically every onion field you will be in will get tip burn. It's a matter of how much disease is around there and how much disease takes off when that natural tip burn happens. So in onions, the It's important to know the difference between Chimera and Zinc deficiency. So Chimera is very distinct lines typically on the different plants or variegated lines, whereas Zinc has also alternating yellow and green strips, but they sort of blend into each other. So that's the difference between the two. Low manganese can cause whiptailing. So you can see it almost looks like there's wind damage in here. This is actually a low manganese plot. And with that, we'll wrap up the physiological issues and move into our test. Any questions about that? Okay. I would ask all of you to pull back up Slido if you could. We are going to do our post quiz. So hopefully we'll go through quickly and hopefully we'll get a couple more answers correct this time through. So pull up Slido, type in carrot. And we can go through our after. So first question, as everybody's getting on, what is this insect? So that's a carrot. Something's feeding on that carrot root. What is it? Is it aster leafhopper? Is it B, carrot rust fly? Is it C, carrot weevil? Is it D, a flea beetle? Is it E, seed corn maggot? Or is it F, tarnished plant bug? So what is feeding on this carrot here? Almost everybody back on and participating. I'll wait a couple seconds more for a couple more answers to trickle in, but what is this big ugly thing here? Three, two, one. So Travis will pull up the answer. And 76% of you got the correct answer. It is carrot weevil, correct? Get it, that one. And or is this question two? That's why. That's why. All right, we'll swap it. The reason, of course, right, larger, and this stupid orange brown head on it is what distinguishes that carrot weevil from a carrot rust fly. Okay. Second question, what is this insect? So on that yellow orange sticky card, this insect, is it an aster leafhopper, or is it a carrot rust fly, or a carrot weevil? Is it an aphid, or is it a tarnished plant bug? What do you think it is? A couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is A, aster leafhopper. So, of course, right? Blue-green, spots on its head, aster leafhopper. Okay, question 3. What causes damage on here? What's going on with this carrot? Is it A, aster yellows? Is it B, carrot weevil? Is it C, a nutrient deficiency? Is it D, violet root rot? Or is it E, white mold? Do we see that one in the pre? Yeah. Yes. Couple more seconds to get your guesses in. So carrot here, yellow leaves on it. Not yellow leaves, well, yellow leaves and red leaves on it. 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is, of course, A, aster yellows caused by the previous question, aster leafhopper. Question 4, what is this insect? Again, another yellow sticky card question. Yellow sticky card, got this insect on here, a couple body parts, looks pretty black. Got a lighter legs on it. Is it an aster leafhopper? Is it a carrot rust fly, carrot weevil, a leaf miner, or a wireworm? 3, 2, 1. Final answer is B, carrot rust fly. Nice work. 3 black sections, orangish head, yellow legs. So number 5, what caused this damage on this carrot? Looks like there's some feeding damage here, right? Some weird tunneling. What caused it? Is it aster leafhopper? Is it carrot rust fly? Is it a carrot weevil? Or is it flea beetle or wireworm damage? Couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And the correct answer in this case is actually carrot weevil. Kind of tricky because it does kind of look like wiring damage as well, but top third of the carrot, open tunneling. Wireworm can look similar, but you'll often see more deeper tunneling going in and out of the carrot as opposed to open tunneling cavity, as you see in this picture. So number 6, what is this insect? The yellow sticky card, this red circle here. What is this insect on the card? Is it an aster leafhopper? Is it an onion maggot? Is it allium leaf miner, seed corn maggot, or an onion thrips? Okay, try again. On your Slido, so aster leafhopper, onion maggot, leaf miner, seed corn maggot, or thrips. This yellow circle here compared to this one. 3, 2, 1. And our answer is D, seed corn maggot. Also kind of a tricky one, but if you can see here that onion maggot, a little bit bigger compared to the little bit smaller seed corn maggot. Again, if you really wanted to tell, you could take this and look in the dissecting scope and tell the difference between the hairs on the legs, but in our case, size will have to do. What's this insect? Looks like it's on an onion plant. This little fly here, what is it? Aster leafhopper, onion maggot, allium leaf miner, seed corn maggot, or onion thrips. Couple more seconds, and 3, 2, 1. And this one is our onion maggot, right? Gray body, red eyes, adult fly. Question 8. Couple more. More or last one? 2 more. What caused this damage? Onion. Looks like there's some silvery stuff here. A little bit of discoloration. What caused this? Is it botrytis? Is it B, downy mildew? Is it C, iris yellow spot? Is it D, onion thrips? Is it E, rain or hail damage? Or is it F, stem phyllium? What do you think caused that on this onion plant here? Couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And our answer is D. This is onion thrips feeding. You can see that they scraped away the top chlorophyll and it's starting to look all silvery. If you opened up the onion, you'd probably see a bunch of thrips down there in the heart. Is that 100%? 100%. Killing it. Okay, number 9. What is this? This is an onion plant. Looks like it's a little wilted and fallen over. What would have caused this? Is it bacteria rot A? Is it B, aster yellows? Is it C, onion maggot? Is it D, white rot? Is it onion smut? Or is it F, downy mildew? Oh, is it? Are we going into pre? I see. So our answers are done. Now we're going to the pathology pre question. So you will likely not see these ones. You will likely not know the answer unless you've scouted before. So your best guess is all we're looking for here. So I'll go through quite quickly. So 3, 2, 1. Number 10. What do you think caused this? It's a carrot. It looks like it's a root, and it looks like there's some dead spots on it. So what do you think caused that? Aster yellows A, B, carrot weevil, C, heat canker, D, pythium, E, root knot nematode, or F, root lesion nematode. So if you know, please answer. If you don't know, just please guess. A couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Number 11. What disease is this? Carrot. Got a bunch of leaves, got a bunch of spots on it, on the leaves and on the petiole. What do you think caused this? Is it A, Alternaria? Is it B, bacterial? Is it C, Cercospora? Is it D, powdery mildew? Or is it E, white mold? Couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Number 12. Another carrot question. What caused this? Look at these big open lesion looking things on the carrot. What do you think caused that? A, Aspergillus, B, Pythium, C, root lesion nematode, D, Fusarium, or E, violet root rot? Best guesses are welcome. 3, 2, 1. What is this on this picture? So it looks like a carrot canopy of some kind. Looks like some older leaves and some white fuzz on it. What do you think is causing this? Is it A, Alternaria leaf blight? Is it B, bacterial leaf blight? Is it C, violet root rot? Is it D, powdery mildew? Or is it E, white mold? Couple more seconds. 3, 2, 1. What is this? Onion plant. Looks like it was pulled up. Looks like there's a bunch of black on the bulb looking things. What do you think that is? Is it Fusarium basal rot? Is it B, onion smut? Is it C, white rot? Is it D, stem and bulb nematode? Or is it E, black rot? Couple more seconds to get your answers in. 3, 2, 1. What do you think caused this? Looks like an onion plant. Looks like a bunch of twisted leaves that are starting to die. Looks like a bit of fuzz on there. What do you think caused that damage? Is it A, onion thrips? Is it B, botrytis? Is it C, downy mildew? Is it D, sclerotinia? Is it F or E, fusarium, and F, stem phyllium? More seconds. 3, 2, 1. What caused this? Another onion picture. Looks like it's dying off. Looks like there's a bunch of lesions in there and yellowing from the tip. What do you think caused that damage? Is it A, iris yellow spot? Is it B, botrytis? Is it C, downy mildew? Is it D, herbicide damage? E, fusarium, or F, stem phyllium? What do you think caused that? 3, 2, 1. Another onion question. It's a bulb that pulled up. You pulled it up and it's got a bunch of fuzz on the basal plate. What do you think is causing that fuzz on the bottom part of the onion? Is it A, Fusarium basal rot? Is it B, onion smut? C, botrytis? D, stem and bulb nematode? Or E, white rot? 2, 1. And that wraps up our pre. So we are going to have another break. Go stretch your legs, get some to eat if you have it, or a drink if you have it. And we will get back to our pathology sections in about 10 minutes. So see you then. Okay, we're back in business. Push through the last section. Okay, I'm going to talk about carrot diseases now. So list of the common ones you'll likely see in Ontario. The 2 carrot leaf blights for sure you'll come across, either one or the other. There's also bacteria leaf blight in here as well, which I'll talk a little bit about, but for sure you will see some carrot leaf blight out there this year. White mold is a maybe. Cavity spot, Pythium root dieback, violet root rot, nematodes. These 3 at the bottom here are all probably the most common soil-borne disease issues that you're going to see. We do have a pest calendar available. It should be in your binders. Those of you online, just give us an email and we can send it to you as well. But when you expect to see those pests in the field, depending on the time of year. So, of course, damping off early in the season, right? You can see Rhizoctonia pretty much all year. Aspergillus more to the end of the year. Same with Alternaria, that kind of thing. So ask us if you like a copy. Okay, leaf blights. most important, probably disease that you'll see foliarly, caused by two main fungi. One's an alternaria, which is why it's alternaria leaf blight. One's a Cercospora, which is why it's called Cercospora leaf blight. Historically, it has been managed the same. So basically, it's been, do you see a leaf blight on the leaf? Okay, that's an infected one. Once you have 25% incidence of the plants, then you would spray. There's been a little bit of separation now of these. The fungicides that were historically used were worked on both of them, but a lot of the newer fungicides that are coming out are more specific, and they usually only work on alternaria, and they don't usually have a lot of Cercospora activity. So it's more important now to distinguish between the two, because a lot of the newer fungicides may not work on Cercospora. If you have Cercospora, there's only a certain number of fungicides you can use for that, or it may work on alternaria or vice versa. So first one, Cercospora leaf blight. This one is the spotty one. So circular to oval spots in the leaves. Cercospora, I'd say circospot. Think of it that way. A little bit of whatever it's called. That thing. This one also infects the petioles. So that's the distinguishing part about this one as well. If there's any lesions like this on the petioles, if the petioles are infected, it is Cercospora, not alternaria. More pictures of it, right? You got that brown spot with the circle yellow halo, very distinct, spot, spot, spot. And then there you go. You got those oval lesions on the stem. Very distinguished. Oh, I can see more here too. Those spots, right? Very distinct. Alternaria is a little differently. It's more irregular, doesn't have nice spots. It's kind of random. They do also have that yellow halo as it's infecting a little bit. Usually starts in the leaf margins. So I think of this one as more of a burning leaf blight, right? You'll see spots where it looks like all the tips are starting to die back and burn back. That's more likely alternaria. Doesn't usually affect the petioles until the leaves are all dead, right? And then it'll affect it back. There won't be spots on the petioles. The leaf tips will start to be dying back irregularly. More pictures, right? It starts to get in on the tips. See the curling and the dieback here on the tips. And then this is a really initial infection on the tips of the carrots. Now there's a third leaf blight that's not usually grouped in with the other two, right? The other two are fungi. So there's fungicides to control them. There's also a bacteria blight that you can see, but we don't really have good products registered to control it. Maybe some copper, but that usually work very well. So these are more regular dark brown, usually a little bit more dry and brittle. Like you can feel when you start playing around with the stems and stuff like that, they'll just kind of snap on you. Usually see it more in hot and humid conditions. The bacteria loves hot and humid, a bunch of rain, it'll splash around. And you usually see it in like smaller spots. So like a couple of plants will be totally infected in a small spot and it'll be spreading out from there. What's very distinct about the bacteria leaf blight is this warping curling. So what happens with the bacteria blight is a bacteria gets in, right, to the hydrophodes, but it can't get across the middle vein, right? It's restricted across the vein. So it'll kill all this part, but the rest of it will continue to grow. So that's why you get that weird warping around the edges. So that's very distinct about this bacteria leaf blight. Can't get across the vein, kills one side of it, and it grows and warps over. Why does it matter? Well, I showed you how they're harvested earlier. If you get a bunch of leaf blight and the leaves are all brittle, they try and pick up the tops and they'll just snap right off and fall back into the field. So you spent all that money for nothing. So that's the main reason. If you get heavy infection, you can also lose pretty significant yield as well. So what are you looking for? Typically we sample 100. So you're doing your spot counts. You're looking at least 100. Our spray threshold is kind of 25 of the leaves have symptoms. So early in the season, some of the older leaves, you can use that as your 25% threshold. But once you have disease in the field, that disease is not going away. And especially on those older leaves on the lower part of the canopy, it's going to keep spreading in there. So you don't want to keep, it's not a cumulative threshold. you want it to be more of an action threshold. So you don't want to count all that old infected at the bottom of the canopy. You want to take those sort of 3 or 4 at the top of the canopy, those new leaves, and see if it's continuing to spread throughout the rest of the canopy. So later in the season, when you're getting into August and things like that, use those sort of newer leaves as your leaf blight representative sample, not the bottom of the canopy. I mentioned this a couple of times. Growers like to apply a fungicide in before the canopy closes. Another reason of that, once the canopy closes, leaf blight usually goes crazy as well, right? Nice and cool for it, nice and wet for it, and it usually explodes on all those older leaves that are starting to die back. Once you get into October, I'm not sure if many of you will be scouting into October, but once you get into those later in the season, blight usually slows down pretty well. Once you get below sort of 9 degrees daily average temperature, you don't get a lot of spread, and this is perfect harvesting temperature, but not necessarily good for leaf blight. Okay, so into more canopy issues, right? So that once the canopy closes, white mold becomes a real issue. This is probably the main reason they want to get a fungicide on, is to control the white mold. A problem in a whole bunch of crops. If you scout soybeans, you're looking for white mold as well. Very general and can affect a wide range of crops. White cottony growth, very fluffy, usually infects old dying leaves. So you'll open up the canopy at the bottom, you'll see the leaves dying back. You see a bunch of fluffy white growth. That growth will make its way down the petioles into the crown of the carrot, and it'll wait there until they're harvested and in storage. And in storage, it will explode. So mostly the issue is a storage rot, mostly a fresh market issue, and it can basically spread through a whole box and just turn things to mush. What's distinct about that white fluff is a lot of times they'll have these kind of black hard sclerotia, kind of looks like mouse poop. It'll be all ingrained in the white mycelium. That's their overwintering structures. So yeah, not great. Did some research on this pathogen and it's disgusting. Powdery mildew, usually a foliar issue, mostly in the southwestern Ontario. I haven't seen it kind of outside or past London for whatever reason, but very distinct, just powdery white growth on top. You can kind of wipe it off if you touch it. Doesn't usually become a big issue unless there's heavy infection. Usually the fungicides for the leaf blights are controlling most of the powdery mildew. Let's start moving down into the soil. So when you're looking at the canopy, this is violet root rot. Looks very similar to sclerotinia white mold, right? White mycelium, but it'll have a purple hue on it. That's very different. Very important because violet root rot is much, much more important than white mold, or not necessarily important, but more infectious. If you have violet root rot in a field, it's a huge issue. It hardly ever goes away, and it's a massive issue for growing carrots. Once you pull the carrots up, it infects the outside of the carrot, so basically infects the skin, turns it kind of a purple, and rots it. So when you pull the carrots up, you'll have a whole bunch of dirt sticking to it. That's symptomatic of violet root rot because it's rotted the skin. So again, white mat, purple hue, pull it up, purple hue on the skin. Nematodes, soil-borne, worm-like pathogens. They usually cause forking and galling. There's a couple of species that cause problems, but in general, they cause forking and galling. Sometimes, depending on the species, you can actually see them. You can see either the galls that they form, or you can see the actual cysts in some cases. So I'll first talk about, on the left here is root knot nematode. These are the galls that it creates. So basically it gets in, it creates a feeding site and just sucks all the nutrients out of it, but it causes the roots to swell. So what it does is it changes the cells of the carrot to just basically grow indeterminately, which is why it causes that swelling. So it makes a big feeding site and just sucks all the nutrients out, causes forking if it gets in the taproot, causes a whole bunch of hairy root appearance. So if you pull up a carrot and it has a whole bunch of roots and all the soil sticking with it, a lot of times it can be caused by nematodes. On the right-hand side is a carrot cyst nematode. So it causes very similar damage, causes forking, causes stunting, causes a whole bunch of roots, but sometimes on those finer roots, you can actually see the cysts. So you can see right here and here and here. These are actually cysts. They actually are the nematode females that are hanging outside the roots. Each female will have a couple hundred eggs in them. So she'll fall off and she'll harden and protect all the eggs. So once you have cysts, nematodes in a field, you'll have them for years to decades. Huge problem, big problem in a whole bunch of other crops. Soybean cyst nematode, very similar idea. Once it's in there, it's hard to get rid of them. Pythium, root dieback. A couple ways that Pythium causes problems. The first one is the root dieback. So early in the season, it'll infect and kill the taproot, which is why it causes a whole bunch of forking. You can see here, not a very long taproot, just a whole bunch of other side roots. Sometimes cause stunting, discoloration, and it looks, something's called rusty root because it has like a brown orange appearance when it's infecting. So if you do catch the infection, you can actually usually see that sort of brown and orange discoloration on the root. Cavity spot is also Pythium, but it's Pythium that infects later in the season. So this is usually an August, September issue. So that same Pythium that infected the taproot, in this case, infects the side roots, and it'll kill the side roots and cause a little bit of an issue on the taproot. So as those dead side roots, the taproot starts to expand, those dead areas just grow and grow and grow and become more and more of an issue. This gets worse and worse in storage as well. So it'll just be a bunch of nasty black spots on the side of the carrot root. Pythium is a water mold, which means that it loves water. It can actually swim places. So you usually see this when there is a wet, sort of late August, September. So later in the summer, if we have a wet season, you typically see more issues with cavity spot and Pythium. More root diseases, crater rot caused by Rhizoctonia species. It can happen in the field and gets worse in storage. It's not nice in terms of cavity spot, nice elliptical shapes, right? And they just grow and grow. With crater rot, it's sort of just random rotten areas on the side, and it's deeper than cavity spot. Fusarium root rot, nasty disease, mostly found on muck soil. So if you're not scouting on muck, this is less of an issue. Long black circular lesions usually circle the around the carrot taproot. It was found fairly recent, within the last 10, 12 years. Growers are fairly familiar if they have the spots or they're in their field. And again, mostly a muck issue. Crown gall, sort of a secondary pathogen. It's sort of an agrobacterium that just grows out the side of a carrot root, and to these actual like nasty galls, you can kind of knock them off. Usually not that much of an issue, usually associated with high nitrogen use. So I would say typically growers that are doing multiple side dresses, you typically see more of this crown gall pop up when you are scouting. And that's most of what you'll see in terms of carrot diseases. Back to Travis.
Awesome. Let's get started on onions. So here's that onion pest activity calendar. We're going to be focusing on the top half, all of these pathogens here. So our first one we're going to start with is because it infects really early in the season. That's onion smut. So this is often the first pathogen we're going to see in the field. So leaves become lighter as that fungi is growing within the leaf, and eventually those leaves will burst open and it will look like there's a whole bunch of soil that's collected inside that leaf. So basically this fungi infects the, it germinates in the early spring and it infects the flag leaf as it is emerging from the ground. And then the fungi grows throughout the plant in cool and wet conditions. So we may not see as much of it this year just because it's not as wet. And then as it grows through the plant, it colonizes the leaf and it reduces the photosynthetic rate of that plant and reduces the yield and basically stunts the plant. So Growers can use Evergol treated seed to protect from infection. And if you can implement a 5-year crop rotation and avoid planting too deep. So as a scout, you would inspect 10 plants and at each stop and record the percent of onion smut that you find in those 10 plants. Another early season pathogen is pink root. So plants also appear stunted and they may exhibit tip dieback. When plants are pulled from the ground, the roots will be bright pink. Doesn't need to be all the roots, just some of them. And this fungus prefers temperatures over 24 degrees Celsius. And while it only infects the roots, these dead roots can act as an entry point for other pathogens at the basal plate, such as Fusarium basal rot. So a crop rotation of 3 years can greatly decrease the levels of spores, and there are resistant cultivars of onions available. So as a scout, I would carefully dig up your suspected plants, record trends where the pathogen is being found in the field. If pathogen levels are high, record the number of plants infected out of 10 at each of your 5 stops. Our next pathogen is botrytis, and it is distinguished by this bright oval lesion surrounded by a silvery white halo. So it's possible to see this pathogen in mid-June. However, the amount of botrytis that we've observed over the last 5 to 10 years has been low. And it's likely because the fungicides that we're using to control Stemphylium or manage Stemphylium are doing a pretty good job controlling botrytis. So as a scout, you would flag that you actually found botrytis. And if you do find it, count the average number of lesions per leaf on the 3 oldest green leaves per 10 plants. So the next fungi is purple blotch, as seen here on the right-hand side of your slide. So it has tan brown spots that have this purplish tint to them and has sometimes visible concentric rings. So this is alternaria, and it can produce these concentric rings as it grows. If you look on the left, you've got this streaking. You don't have the rings, you don't have that purplish hue. That's Stemphylium. So as you are looking for these oval lesions with brown centers, they shouldn't have any black speckling that you might find. They're more confined, they're more oval, they're more round than what you would see with Stemphylium. These spores are spread by water, equipment, insects, and workers. And so as a scout, you would record the incidence of plants that are infected again. So at each of your 5 spots, you're looking at 10 plants, you're going to record the number of plants that have purple blotch in that 10. And if the incidence is low throughout the field, record where you're finding it and that you actually found purple blotch in the field. So our next pathogen is Stemphylium, and you will see this summer. This fungi causes lesions that are elongated. It looks like streaking, and there are these black speckling in some of the older lesions. So it's often found on leaves that have been damaged by wind, equipment, herbicide injury, and it's a weak pathogen and it's colonizing those wound sites. In established fields, it can look a lot like tip burn. Those spores are landing even on tip burn and then colonizing the tip burn because that is a wound site. So with Stemphylium, It's important to bury residue as soon as the onions are harvested the previous year, just to lower the inoculum level and allow that to break down as soon as possible. Avoid herbicide injury if possible. Follow the label for those herbicides. Avoid weed hosts, and there's also some evidence to suggest that managing the level of thrips will also decrease the amount of spores that are spread from plant to plant. There are no fungicides that will control stem phyllium. Everything that is labeled is for suppression. Mancozeb, which is registered for onion smut, and group 7s that should be rotated. In Ontario, there is a very high resistance to subphyllium in one of the active ingredients in Quadris and Luna, Tranquility. So it has been suggested to avoid or reduce the use of these fungicides in onions. Our next pathogen, hopefully you won't see this field season, is downy mildew. So here you've got that fuzzy mycelial growth on the leaf. When you hold it up to the light, you can actually see this the mycelium growing off of the leaf. It's actually got a velvety, furry-like appearance there. So one plant showing this fuzzy growth becomes, a 2-foot circle in a couple days. And then a few days later, it's 1/8 of an acre. And then a few days after that, it could be the whole field. It spreads quite quickly. Here's an entire section of the field. I returned to this field 3 days later, same spot in the field. So the spores are able to infect when the foliage remains wet for 2 hours and at a temperature less than 22 degrees Celsius. So these spores will germinate at night and are spread during the day by wind or rain or overhead irrigation. So downy mildew is an oomycete, a water mold, and it's not a true fungi. So the fungicides targeting something like Symphylium are not going to have any effect on downy mildew. Downcast is a forecasting system used to predict downy mildew development outbreaks, and as in our VCR, we will be forecasting it for a couple areas. Most fungicides are protective, so it's important to manage this pathogen early. The reason being is if the onions die standing up in the field, that's a great entry point for bacteria to make their way down to the bulb and cause problems in storage months later. So often fields that have downy mildew outbreaks, they're going to be for a fresh market, and you don't want to store those bulbs for very long. Arondis Ultra, Alliette, and Ridamel Gold have seemed to perform well as protective fungicides against this pathogen in trials at the Muck Crops Research Station. The next pathogen is iris yellow spot virus. We don't see this too often in onions. This was first identified in Ontario in 2007 and has not been seen in onions much since. This pathogen creates tan lesions with this green island in the middle of the lesion, which is very characteristic compared to most of the other leaf tan lesions that you're going to find in the field. So it's vectored by onion thrips. So it's important to manage thrips if you find this even more so if you find this pathogen in the area. So as a scout, you'll want to record that you actually found iris yellow spot. There are Eggia test strips where you could take a little bit, 5 grams of leaf sample, mix it up, put in your test strip, and see if it tests positive for iris yellow spot virus. If it's only a few plants, rogue them out, put them in that garbage bag that I told you to keep in your scouting vehicle at the beginning of the workshop. Fusarium basal rot is our next onion pathogen. I tend to see this a lot in areas where we have a high amount of soil moisture. This tends to be a greater pathogen in onions that are under drip irrigation. Leaves turn yellow, and when the bulb is pulled, there are roots missing from that bulb's basal plate. If you look closely and we've got high humidity in the field, you're going to see white, fluffy mycelial growth. In some cases, you'll see red or orange. Is it Eurydiaspore? Spores on the base of the plant. Oh, there they are. Oh boy. Sporodokia spore clusters. Prefers warm weather. As a scout, you would want to try to estimate what percentage of plants are infected. Pull up some stunted plants, inspect those basal plates, look at how healthy those roots are. They should be bright white, full, and it should be hard to pull that onion out. In infected plants, make a cut through the onion and inspect the basal plate and look for any sort of discoloration that could be caused by the Fusarium. The next pathogen, I hope none of you will come across this field season. It's Sclerotinium white rot of onion, and it's caused by the same genus of white mold that we see in carrots. So they're both Sclerotinia. This is Cephaloborum, and it basically produces this white mycelial growth with soft rot at the base of the plant with this white mycelium. Unlike Fusarium, where you just get the white mycelium and there might be like a red or a orangish tinge to it, with the white rot, you'll get these little black sclerotia forming that look like poppy seeds on onions. They're a little bit bigger in onion, other crops, but in onions, there'll be little black dots. And if you don't see those black dots and you just see the white mycelial growth growing on the base of the plant, take that onion, chop off the top of it, put it in a Ziploc bag, blow some air to it, make it really humid, and put it on a shelf in the shade for a couple days. That mycelium will continue to grow. And if it's Fusarium, it might turn red, it might be orange, it will still be white and fluffy. But if it's white rot, you'll get those black hardened sclerotia. These black sclerotia can lay dormant in the soil for up to 40 years. This is a generational pathogen, and that's why it's so important to catch this early and make sure that it is indeed you're finding Fusarium and not white rot. So management strategies today really affect the crops that will be grown in that field for the next generation. It's so important to catch this early. When found in patches, like spot fumigation might be considered. Separate machinery might be used for that field. Infected onions should be removed from that field, buried off in a field that will never be onions again. As a scout, you notify the grower, use one of those Ziploc bags, and contain the sample when you leave the field, and avoid going to any other onion fields that day. Then there are nematodes. So there are some nematodes that go after the plant tissue, and then there are some that live around the rhizosphere within the soil that is close to those roots. And there are different races of bulbous stem nematode that infect different Allium species. But the nice thing about onions is that you're planting them by seed, and you're not planting onions that already have bulbous stem nematode in them, like a clove in garlic, where the mother plant, if it had bulbous stem nematode, those daughter cloves are likely to have bulbous stem nematode. With onion seeds, that's not the case. So you're looking for, at that outer layer of the bulb, being twisted, distorted, or cracked, and you're sending it into the lab or using a dissecting scope to see if you can find any nematodes in that bulb, because this might be the cracking or splitting might be because of an influx of soil moisture. So it's important to check to see if it's actually nematodes that are the cause of that basal distortion on the onion bulb. Another nematode I would like to discuss is root knot nematode. This nematode lives in the deeper parts of the soil and attacks the roots, not the bulb. So this is why it's important to have a trowel in your vehicle, because if you pull that onion out, those roots that might be infected by that nematode are weak, they're going to crack, they're going to fall off. When you pull that onion out, you're not going to have any nematodes left on that onion, and it's going to go improperly diagnosed. So you're going to use a trowel, shovel, dig up those roots, gently knock off the soil and inspect the roots for these knots, these galls. So as a scout, dig up some plants, record your findings. Next, we'll go over some bacterial rots. So there are over a dozen different genre bacterial rots that have shown to be able to infect onions. There are several species within the genus as well, where different strains can also attack those onions. We're going to discuss three main groups and based on the symptoms that they occur in the onion. So the first one is slippery skin. And your first clue that you might have slippery skin present is that the onions will smell absolutely delightful. Okay, when you pull the or like hold the onion bulb or pull out the the top might pop off. If you squeeze it, like the inner portions will just kind of ooze out, slide out of the neck. It's often uncertain where the inoculum source came from. It could have been from call piles or crop debris and then blew into the crop into a wound site caused by an insect or a pathogen, or from wind damage. Could be from an irrigation pond that was irrigated, that crop was irrigated and those water droplets landed in a wound created by wind and are just sitting there idle until appropriate conditions occur later on, maybe in storage. This shows up 4 or 5 months from now, or from the time it was harvested. So yeah, here's sour skin, another bacterial pathogen. It appears first as tan or brown rotted leaves, followed by soft rot near the neck, similar life cycle as slippery skin. And then we've got soft rot. The leaves in this case can be easily pulled apart. You'll see that the plants just kind of like melt and are like horizontal. You've got this soft rot. If you were to cut it open, the inner rings could be soft as well. So bacterial rots are not fully understood, and there's some research going on to evaluate how different management strategies could impact bacterial rot development in the crop. Here is a list of different management options that I believe to most likely have an impact or an effect on bacterial rots, preventing damage. Plants that died prematurely standing up had 2 times as much bulb rot as at harvest. As far as in-season management strategies go, if you happen to cut open a bulb and ID the bacteria, you know, a lot of the damage has already been done. However, here are some management strategies to look for the future. Minimize injury at harvest, prevent the onions from dropping and bruising. That's going to be a wound site that could be colonized in storage. Be gentle to that harvested onion and ensure onions are properly cured before placing in storage. So that is a summary of the main pathogens affecting onions in Ontario. Our retired colleague, Mike Chiletti, always showed these resources that were available at the end of the IPM presentation, and I'd like to do the same. These are great books to have if you can find them. The Diseases of Pests of Vegetable Crops and one specifically for onions and garlic. If you can get your hands on them, they're great to keep in your back pocket or on the dash of your vehicle. Crop IPM is a great resource online that will be updated in the next couple years. And with that, I'd like to thank all of the contributors to these photos in the past slides. And now, before you leave, I'd like to go through those questions to prove that you actually learned something today. It's quite helpful. And then at the end of these questions, there'll be a survey to fill out. And it would mean a lot if you were able to complete that survey as well. So if you could hop back onto Slido for a minute, we'll get started with the first question. I think there were someone's banned asparagus. All right, first question. So we've got some plants that have just wilted. What is this? Bacterial rot, Aspergillus, onion maggot, white rot, onion spot, or downy mildew. We're up to 5 people. Let's get it up there. What is this pathogen? With the lights off, the people in the room are unable to look at their handbooks to look for answers too. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What have we got here? Bacterial rot. Oh man, 38% of you got that right. So we've got these tan leaves that have just basically dropped and wilted. If we were to pull this onion up and do a cross section, those inner leaves, the bacteria would be spreading right into the bulb, and it wouldn't smell great either. All right, next one. What caused this? Looks like some sort of carrot root. Aspergillus, carrot weevil, heat canker, Pythia, root knot nematode, root lesion nematode. We're looking at this lesions here, the middle and lower half, right, Dennis? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many people picked Pythium? 8%. Those 8%, well done. Root lesion nematode, it does look like root lesion nematode. Right. Yeah. So it was ID'd as Pythium, but it looks like root lesion. Oh, we want to make root lesion nematode an alternate answer. Okay. All right. Next pathogen. What leaf disease is this? Alternaria leaf blight, bacterial leaf blight, Cercospora leaf blight, powdery mildew, or white mold, spelled properly. Canadian. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What did we choose? Cercospora for the win. We've got those tan lesions on the PDO. What disease is this? So we're looking at these lesions on the outside. Is it Aspergillus, Pythium, root lesion nematode, Fusarium, or violet root rot? How confident are you in this one? Not. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, Pythium. Cavity spot, right? But root lesion nematodes up there again.
Don't hate that answer. The root lesion does look a little bit different. It's kind of similar, but it causes it to kind of grow out from itself. The cavity spot is indented with the root lesion damage. Usually it starts to grow out.
So you wouldn't have that cavity there with the nematode. All right, what disease is this? Alternaria leaf blight, bacterial leaf blight, violet root rot, powdery mildew, or white mold? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many people chose white mold? Everyone, well done. What is this? Is this Fusarium basil rot, onion smut, white rot, stem and bulb nematode, or black rot? Black lesions appearing, kind of translucently growing in that onion bulb. Oh, wow. You guys were able to file answers to that one quick. All right, lock those answers in and you've got onion smut. 85% of you. Well done. And our next one, what caused this leaf distortion and this white, fluffy, velvety growth? Onion thrips, botrytis, downy mildew, sclerotinia, fusarium, or Stemphylium leaf blight? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well done to everyone who picked downy mildew. What caused this? We've got tip dieback with some black, elongated spot. Iris yellow spot virus, botrytis, downy mildew, herbicide damage, fusarium, or Stemphylium. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1.25, 1. Voting closed. Those who chose Stemphylium are correct. So you've got elongated spot, black stretch lesion. It's not contained to an oval. That would be a characteristic of purple blotch. What is this? We've got some white mycelial growth. Looks to be some black spots within that white mycelial growth. Is it Fusarium basil rot, onion smut, botrytis, stem and bulb nematode, or white rot? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Those who chose white rot are correct. This isn't Fusarium because we've got those white or black sclerotia within the white mycelia. So if you could fill out the survey before you leave, that would be great. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or email us. And I hope you have a great growing season.